And Coalition leader Tony Abbott joins me now from our Parliament House studios in Canberra. Tony Abbott, why isn't your new climate change policy a message to Australia's big polluters? Under an Abbott government, taxpayers will pay you to reduce your carbon pollution. You don't have to cop any of the pain yourselves.
Well, under Mr Rudd's scheme, taxpayers will pay because they're consumers. And they'll pay a lot more, Kerry. They'll pay $120 billion over 10 years as opposed to $10 billion under our scheme.
But Mr Abbott, you know that's not true, because you've got the tables that everybody is privy to, that the government has released, which show that in 91% of Australian households there will actually be a net gain to those households by what the government compensates them for what they've lost in increased prices.
Well, I'm not sure that the government has been quite as upfront and honest with publishing all its modelling as you suggest.
But equally, Mr Abbott, is it honest of you to say, baldly as you just did, that this entire cost of $100 billion plus will actually come out of taxpayers' pockets, consumers' pockets? Is that correct?
But it's a giant money go round. It's a giant drag on the economy, which we don't need, because this funds a whole lot of middlemen and traders in a way that my scheme, the Coalition's proposal, doesn't.
But is it honest of you to say that consumers and taxpayers will pay $110 billion, or whatever figure it is you use? Is that honest?
Well, because of the volume of trades, the cumulative value of all this on the government's own figures is close to $120 billion.
The total churn, as you put it, does not mean that individuals will foot that bill, does it?
Yes, but this is the drag factor on our economy. If what you want to do, Kerry, is to get emissions reduction, I think we can do it through $10 billion worth of direct emissions purchases, rather than this vastly more complex system, which the Prime Minister still can't really explain, that's going to involve a money go round more than 10 times as large.
You call it a money go round, but I'll come back to that question for the last time. Is it really honest of you to paint this as a $110 billion tax that would be paid for by consumers? Because if it is, how do you justify it?
Yeah, these are the government's own figures. I can do no better than run on the government's own figures, Kerry.
But their figures show that they are compensating households for the pain.
But you've got to pay it before you can be compensated. And I think one of the fears that people have, and I think it's a justifiable fear, is that the costs will stay, but the compensation will gradually be eroded, particularly when you've got people like Ken Henry out there saying that taxes will have to go up because government spending is unsustainable.
What in your policy would persuade polluting electricity generators not to build new coal-fired power stations?
Well, if their emissions intensity went up beyond its current levels, they would face a penalty. And of course, they do have the capacity to apply to our emissions reduction fund for money to sustain carbon emission reductions.
But there is nothing in your plan that acts as a serious disincentive for them not to keep building more polluting electricity generators.
Well, they can't increase their emissions intensity because if they increase their emissions intensity, they will face penalties, and we'll be working with the sector to finalise the design of the penalties, but nevertheless they will face penalties if they increase their emissions intensity.
But they don't face penalties if they continue to pollute at the same level.
Business as usual. Look, business as usual is not going to cost them more, because we don't want to put their prices up. And look, you know, these so-called nasty big polluters are the people that keep the lights on. I mean, let's not forget just how essential these people are to the business of daily life.
They do keep the lights on, but they do pollute.
Well, they put out carbon.
Yeah. In the Parliament today, you don't think putting out carbon is any form of pollution in the context of climate change?
I want to reduce emissions. That's why I'm proposing to spend $10 billion over the next decade to do that. But I think we've also got to accept that carbon dioxide is an essential trace gas as well.
By the same token, are you really saying that you're doing this because politically you're forced to, or are you doing it because you believe that the level of carbon dioxide emissions in the globe are a serious contribution to climate change?
Look, I want to do the right thing by the environment, and I think that there is enough evidence that carbon dioxide might be a problem to try to reduce emissions. But I tell you what else we're doing here. We are buying objective environmental improvements. We're getting, we hope, 1 million extra solar roofs. We're getting 20 million more trees. And the sorts of things that we will be funding, Kerry, under our emissions reduction fund are the sorts of things that are objective goods, such as higher soil carbon content, which will have more productive farmland, trying to use carbon dioxide and other waste from power stations to produce things that can then be made into biodiesel and stock feed. We are trying to do objectively good environmental benefits with this policy.
Mr Abbott, you're using terminology like there's enough evidence that carbon dioxide might be a problem. When you put that alongside what you told that audience in regional Victoria in October last year, the climate change argument is absolute crap, quote, however, the politics are tough for us because 80% of people believe climate change is a real and present danger. In other words, I mean, the only conclusion you can draw from that is that you're saying we have to have a climate change policy because the people believe it's a danger, but I believe it's crap.
Well, no, and as I've said before, Kerry, there was a little bit of rhetorical hyperbole in there which does not represent my considered position. Look, I'm not as evangelical about this as Prime Minister Rudd is. I mean, I'm not theological about this the way Prime Minister Rudd is. But I do think it's important, and that's why I'm prepared to invest $10 billion over the coming decade to bring about things which will be good, regardless, good for the environment, regardless of your views on the role of carbon dioxide in climate.
So when you say a bit of rhetorical hyperbole in that conversation with that audience, you're saying you adjust your message to whatever audience you're playing to. In other words, if that's the case, how do we know you haven't just adjusted your message for this audience?
Kerry, look, all of us occasionally are a bit loose with our language, and that was certainly an occasion when I said what I shouldn't have said.
Well, there's nothing loose. There's nothing loose about the meaning of a term. Nothing loose about the meaning of a term that says absolute crap.
And I think what you'll find if you go back to those comments is that it was the so-called settled science of climate change that I thought was to be described in language that I wouldn't use on a family program.